The Intelligent Communicator: How to Speak Less, Influence More, and Gain Respect. Published by Audiobook Academy. Introduction. Your words can open a door, build a bridge, settle a conflict, or quietly destroy trust. Yet powerful communication has surprisingly little to do with how much you say. It has more to do with knowing what deserves to be said, when it should be said, and how it should be delivered. In a world filled with opinions, explanations, arguments, messages, notifications, and constant conversation, intelligent communication has become a rare advantage. The person who can remain calm when others become emotional, listen when others are waiting to speak, and express a complicated idea in simple words, possesses a form of influence that cannot be easily imitated. Speaking less does not mean becoming quiet, distant, or passive. It means becoming intentional. It means removing the words that weaken your message and strengthening the words that matter. It means learning to listen beneath the surface, pause before reacting, ask better questions, disagree without creating unnecessary enemies, and communicate with confidence without needing to prove your worth. In this audiobook, we will explore the principles that can transform the way you speak, listen, respond, persuade, and connect with people. You will learn how to control impulsive reactions, communicate difficult ideas clearly, establish boundaries, handle tense conversations, and influence others without manipulation or pressure. The goal is not to make you the loudest person in the room. It is to help you become the person whose words carry weight. Because when you learn to communicate intelligently, you don't simply change your conversations, you change the way people experience you. Chapter 1. Speak with intention, not impulse. Every conversation gives you a choice. You can speak because you have something useful to say, or you can speak simply because you feel the need to respond. That difference may seem small, but it can completely change the way people experience you. Intelligent communication begins with one simple habit. Stop treating every thought as something that must immediately become words. Think about how often you speak without really deciding to speak. Someone makes a comment, and you answer automatically. Someone disagrees with you, and you defend yourself before understanding what they meant. A colleague asks a question, and instead of answering directly, you begin explaining everything you know about the subject. Someone becomes emotional, and you match their emotion without even realizing it. These moments feel natural because they happen quickly, but communication becomes powerful when you create a small space between what happens and what you say. That space is where intention lives. Before you speak, ask yourself a simple question. What am I trying to accomplish with these words? Maybe you want to clarify something. Maybe you want to encourage someone. Maybe you need to set a boundary. Maybe you need to solve a problem. Or perhaps you simply want to be understood. When you know your purpose, your communication becomes cleaner. You stop wandering through unnecessary explanations because you know where you are trying to go. Consider Caleb Mercer, a 41-year-old commercial real estate broker in Atlanta. Caleb had recently been promoted to lead a small team, and he felt pressure to demonstrate that he deserved the position. During meetings, he responded to nearly every comment. If someone suggested an idea, he added another idea. If someone raised a concern, he immediately explained why it would work. If the room became quiet, he filled the silence. Caleb believed he was demonstrating leadership, but his constant commentary was making his message less powerful. One afternoon, during a strategy meeting, a senior partner challenged one of his proposals. Caleb felt the familiar urge to defend himself. He had an explanation ready. But this time he paused and asked, "What concerns you most about the proposal?" The partner explained something Caleb had completely overlooked. Instead of defending an incomplete idea, Caleb listened, adjusted the proposal, and responded with a much clearer solution. After the meeting, the senior partner told him, "You handled that well, you actually listened." Caleb discovered something important. Leadership did not require him to have the fastest response. It required him to have the most useful response. You can apply the same principle to your own conversations. When someone challenges you, don't immediately prepare your defense. When someone asks a question, don't rush to impress them. When you disagree, don't treat disagreement as an emergency. Give yourself permission to think. This does not mean becoming slow or overly cautious. It means becoming deliberate. Intelligent communicators can respond quickly when necessary, but their speed comes from clarity rather than impulse. You should also become comfortable with the possibility that you do not need to comment on everything. Not every opinion requires your opinion. Not every criticism requires a defense. Not every silence requires a sentence. Sometimes the strongest response is a thoughtful question. Sometimes it is a brief answer. Sometimes it is simply, "I need to think about that." Your words become more valuable when you stop spending them carelessly. From this point forward, begin treating your speech as a tool rather than a reflex. Before important conversations, know what you want to accomplish. During conversations, notice the urge to react, and when that urge appears, pause long enough to choose your response instead of surrendering it to your emotions. You don't need to speak more intelligently by learning complicated words or impressive techniques. Start by becoming more intentional with the simple words you already use. Speak when your words can improve the moment, and when they cannot, have the confidence to remain silent. Chapter 2. Listen for what people really mean. Listening is often mistaken for waiting. Someone speaks, you remain quiet, and while they are talking, your mind is already preparing your answer. You may be thinking about what you want to say next, how you will defend your position, or how you can add something impressive to the conversation. Your ears are receiving the words, but your attention is somewhere else. Intelligent communication begins when you stop listening merely to respond and start listening to understand. People rarely communicate with words alone. A sentence can carry frustration, uncertainty, excitement, fear, disappointment, or hope. Someone may say, "It's fine," while their tone tells you that everything is far from fine. Someone may say, "I just wanted your opinion," when what they really want is reassurance. Someone may complain about a small inconvenience when the real problem is that they feel ignored. If you listen only to the literal sentence, you can miss the conversation underneath it. This is why intelligent listening requires curiosity. Instead of immediately deciding what someone means, become interested in discovering it. Ask yourself, what is this person really trying to tell me? That question changes the way you listen. You begin noticing pauses, changes in tone, repeated concerns, and the subjects people return to even after the conversation seems to have moved on. Imagine Tessa Vaughan, a 34-year-old operations director for a logistics company in Minneapolis. Her department had been struggling with missed deadlines, and one employee, Daniel, had recently become unusually quiet during team meetings. Tessa initially assumed he had lost motivation. During one private conversation, she almost began giving him advice about time management. Instead, she stopped and asked, "What has been making your work harder lately?" Daniel hesitated before explaining that a new reporting system had doubled the amount of administrative work his team handled each morning. He had mentioned the problem before, but because nobody had asked a follow-up question, he had stopped bringing it up. Tessa realized that what looked like a motivation problem was actually a process problem. Nothing changed because Tessa suddenly became more intelligent. Something changed because she became more curious. You can practice this in your own conversations. When someone tells you something important, resist the temptation to immediately compare it with your own experience. If a friend tells you about a difficult week, you do not always need to respond with a story about your difficult week. If a colleague describes a problem, you do not have to immediately tell them how to fix it. Sometimes the most useful response is simply, "Tell me more." That small phrase can open a conversation that advice would have closed. Good listening also means allowing people to finish. You may already understand the point halfway through their sentence, but understanding the beginning does not mean you understand the whole message. People often discover what they actually think while they are speaking. If you interrupt too early, you may prevent them from reaching the part that mattered most. And remember that listening does not require agreement. You can understand someone's perspective without accepting their conclusion. You can listen to criticism without deciding that the criticism is correct. You can hear an opinion you strongly dislike without becoming defensive. Listening is an act of understanding, not surrender. There is another powerful habit you can develop. Listen for what is repeated. When people repeatedly return to the same concern, that concern usually matters. If a manager keeps mentioning deadlines, perhaps the real issue is reliability. If a partner repeatedly talks about feeling forgotten, perhaps the real issue is attention rather than the specific events being discussed. Repetition often reveals importance. The more carefully you listen, the less you need to guess. You will also discover something unexpected. People become more open when they sense that you are genuinely present. They explain themselves more clearly. They share concerns they might otherwise hide. They become less defensive because they are not constantly fighting for space in the conversation. This is one of the quietest forms of influence. You do not force people to trust you. You create an environment where trust has room to develop. So the next time someone speaks to you, don't ask only, "What did they say?" Ask, "What are they trying to communicate?" Listen to their words, but also listen to their tone, their pauses, their emphasis, and the concerns behind the story. You may discover that the most important part of a conversation is often the part that is never said directly. Chapter 3. Pause before you respond. Between what happens to you and what you say about it, there is a small moment of freedom. It may last only a few seconds, but those seconds can change the direction of an entire conversation. Someone criticizes you, someone sends you an angry message, someone challenges your decision. Your first instinct rises immediately. You want to defend yourself, correct the person, explain your side, or strike back. But intelligent communication begins when you learn not to confuse your first reaction with your best response. A pause gives your judgment time to catch up with your emotions. This does not mean you should become slow, unnatural, or robotic. It simply means you stop allowing every emotional impulse to become a sentence. You breathe, you think, you notice what is happening inside you. Then you decide what deserves to come out of your mouth. Imagine Marcus Bell, a 39-year-old high school principal in Charlotte. Marcus was respected by his staff, but he had developed one frustrating habit. When teachers challenged a decision during meetings, he responded immediately. He knew the school well, so he usually had a reasonable explanation ready. But because his answers came so quickly, people sometimes felt that their concerns had already been dismissed before they had finished speaking. One morning, a teacher questioned a new scheduling policy in front of the staff. Marcus felt irritation rising because he had spent weeks working on the schedule. His first instinct was to explain why the policy was necessary. Instead, he took a breath and said, "Give me a moment to think about that." The room became quiet. Marcus then asked the teacher to explain which part of the schedule was creating the greatest difficulty. The answer revealed a practical problem he had not considered. The policy itself was reasonable, but one part of its implementation was creating unnecessary pressure. Marcus adjusted that part. The important moment was not when he changed the schedule, it was when he resisted the urge to defend it. You can develop the same discipline by recognizing your triggers. Perhaps criticism makes you defensive, perhaps being interrupted makes you angry, perhaps disagreement makes you feel that you must prove yourself. Maybe you become impatient when someone takes too long to explain something. Your triggers are different from someone else's, but the principle remains the same. Notice what pushes you toward automatic speech. The moment you recognize the trigger, create a pause. You can take one slow breath before answering. You can look away for a moment and gather your thoughts. You can say, "Let me think about that." You can ask, "What makes you see it that way?" You can even say, "I'm too frustrated to give you a useful answer right now. Let's come back to this." These are not signs of weakness. They are signs that you are managing yourself. Think about how many arguments begin with a sentence that could have been avoided. Someone makes a sharp comment. You respond with something sharper. They hear disrespect and respond again. You defend your response. They defend theirs. Within minutes, neither person is discussing the original issue. They are now fighting over tone, intention, and wounded pride. The first sentence may have started the conflict, but the second sentence often determines whether it grows. This is why the pause is so powerful. It interrupts the chain. You should especially practice this with written communication. A message typed in anger can be sent in seconds and regretted for years. When you receive something that provokes you, do not assume that an immediate response is necessary. Read it once, put the device down, let the emotional intensity fall. Then return to the message and ask yourself what response would actually serve your purpose. You may discover that the answer you wanted to send was designed to release emotion, not solve a problem. There is a difference between emotional expression and intelligent communication. Sometimes you need to express that you are hurt, disappointed, or angry, but expressing an emotion does not require surrendering control to it. You can say, "That decision disappointed me," without attacking someone's character. You can say, "I strongly disagree," without turning disagreement into disrespect. The pause allows you to separate the feeling from the behavior. It also improves your thinking. When you answer too quickly, you often respond to the first version of the situation that entered your mind. A pause gives you time to consider another interpretation. Maybe the person was not insulting you. Maybe they were frustrated. Maybe their question was genuine. Maybe you misunderstood their tone. Maybe there is information you don't have yet. A thoughtful pause creates room for possibilities. And there is another advantage. People notice composure. When everyone else becomes reactive and you remain steady, your presence changes, your voice becomes calmer, your words become more deliberate. People begin to trust that you will not explode under pressure or say something careless simply because you are emotional. That is a powerful form of respect. The goal is not to eliminate emotion. Emotion is part of being human. The goal is to stop emotion from becoming your automatic spokesperson. So, the next time you feel the urge to answer immediately, pause, take one breath. Let the first reaction pass through your mind without immediately turning it into words. Ask yourself what outcome you want from the conversation, then respond from that intention. Because intelligent communication is not about having the fastest answer. It is about having the wisdom to choose the right one. Chapter 4. Cut the words that weaken you. A clear message does not need a mountain of words behind it. In fact, the more you add to a message, the easier it becomes for the important part to disappear. Intelligent communication is not about saying everything you know. It is about knowing what matters and having the discipline to leave the rest behind. Think about the last time someone gave you a simple answer wrapped inside a long explanation. You probably understood the point within the first few sentences, yet the person continued. They added another example, repeated the same idea differently, explained why they were explaining it, and eventually returned to the point they had already made. By the end, the message felt weaker than it needed to be. This happens because many people believe that more explanation creates more credibility. Often, it creates the opposite. When you know what you mean, you can usually say it more simply. Imagine that you are asking a colleague to finish a report by Friday. You could say, "I just wanted to check in because I know you've probably been busy and I don't want to put too much pressure on you. But if it's possible, I was hoping maybe you could try to get the report finished sometime by Friday because we have that meeting coming up." Or you could say, "Please send me the report by Friday. We need it for the meeting." The second version is not rude, it is clear. The difference is that the first version contains hesitation, unnecessary context, and an apology for making a reasonable request. When you remove the clutter, the message becomes easier to understand. This is one reason intelligent communicators often sound calm and confident. They are not constantly searching for extra words to protect themselves. They trust a clear sentence to do its job. Pay attention to the phrases you use when you are uncertain. Words such as maybe, I guess, sort of, probably, I just feel like, and I'm not sure but, can sometimes be appropriate. But when you use them automatically, they can weaken statements that do not need weakening. Instead of saying, I just kind of think that maybe we should consider changing the plan, say, I think we should change the plan. You are not becoming arrogant, you are becoming precise. The same principle applies to explanations. If you make a mistake, you do not need to build a courtroom defense around it. I made a mistake, I'll correct it by tomorrow, is often stronger than 5 minutes of explaining why the mistake happened. Of course, context matters. Sometimes an explanation is necessary. The goal is not to make every sentence short. The goal is to make every sentence useful. A useful way to practice this is to identify your main point before you begin speaking. Ask yourself, if the listener remembers only one thing from what I'm about to say, what should it be? Once you know the answer, build your communication around it. This is especially valuable in meetings. Instead of giving people the entire history of a problem before telling them what you need, lead with the point. Say what happened, what it means, and what action you recommend. Then provide additional details if they are needed. Clear communication respects attention. Your listener has thoughts, responsibilities, distractions, and limited mental energy. When you make people work unnecessarily hard to find your meaning, you reduce the impact of your message. Simplicity is not merely convenient, it is considerate. You should also learn to stop when your message is complete. This sounds obvious, but it is surprisingly difficult. You make a strong point, the listener understands it, and then you keep talking because the silence feels uncomfortable. You add another sentence, then another. Eventually, you accidentally weaken the statement you had already delivered. Let the point breathe. Silence after a clear statement can sometimes communicate more confidence than another explanation. This does not mean you should become artificially brief or turn every conversation into a series of clipped sentences. Natural communication still needs warmth, personality, stories, and emotion. The goal is not to sound like a machine. The goal is to remove unnecessary friction between your thought and the listener's understanding. You can begin today by listening to yourself more carefully. Notice when you repeat yourself. Notice when you explain something that was already understood. Notice how often you apologize before making a simple request. Notice the words you use when you are nervous, then start removing them. You may discover that you do not need better vocabulary, you need better editing. Your mind produces many thoughts, but not every thought deserves a microphone. Intelligent communication requires selection. Choose the strongest idea, choose the clearest words, deliver the message, then stop. When you learn to remove what is unnecessary, what remains becomes stronger. Your words become easier to understand, your ideas become easier to remember, and your presence begins to carry the quiet confidence of someone who does not need 1,000 words to make one important point. Chapter 5. Ask questions that open minds. A good question can accomplish something a long explanation often cannot. It can slow a heated conversation, uncover a hidden problem, challenge an assumption, or help someone discover an answer they were already capable of finding. When you learn to ask better questions, you stop trying to control every conversation with your own words and begin creating space for other people to think. Consider how often conversations become competitions of statements. Someone says what they believe, you respond with what you believe. They defend their position, you defend yours. Before long, both people are preparing their next argument instead of understanding each other. A thoughtful question can interrupt that cycle. Instead of saying, "That will never work," ask, "What do you think would make it work?" Instead of saying, "You don't understand the situation," ask, "Which part of the situation seems unclear to you?" Instead of immediately telling someone what they should do, ask, "What options have you considered?" The difference is subtle but powerful. A statement often tells people where you stand. A question invites them to reveal where they stand. Intelligent questions begin with genuine curiosity. If you ask a question simply to trap someone, prove them wrong, or make yourself look clever, people will eventually sense the intention behind it. The strongest questions come from a real desire to understand. Think about a manager trying to solve a problem with an employee. A weak approach might sound like this: "Why didn't you finish the project on time?" The question may technically be reasonable, but it can immediately make the employee defensive. A better question might be, "What got in the way of finishing the project?" Now the conversation is focused on understanding the situation rather than assigning blame. That shift can change everything. Questions are especially valuable when emotions are involved. When someone is upset, your instinct may be to correct their interpretation immediately. But if you begin with, "Why do you feel that way?" or "What happened from your perspective?" you create an opportunity for the real issue to emerge. Sometimes people don't need you to solve the problem. They need enough space to understand the problem themselves. This is where follow-up questions become powerful. When someone gives you an answer, don't always jump to your own conclusion. Ask, "What do you mean by that?" Or, "Can you give me an example?" Or, "What concerns you most about it?" These simple questions can take a shallow conversation into a meaningful one. You should also learn to ask questions that help people examine their assumptions. Suppose someone tells you, "I can't do this because I'm not experienced enough." You could respond with a lecture about confidence. Or you could ask, "What would you be willing to try if experience weren't the obstacle?" The question makes them think. That is the deeper power of intelligent communication. You are not always trying to give people answers. Sometimes you are helping them find better questions about their own lives. Of course, not every question is helpful. Avoid turning conversations into interrogations. If you fire questions one after another without listening to the answers, people will feel examined rather than understood. Ask one good question, listen carefully, and let the answer determine what comes next. And pay attention to the questions you ask yourself. Your internal questions influence how you approach external conversations. If you constantly ask, "How do I prove I'm right?" you will communicate defensively. If you ask, "What can I understand here?" you become more receptive. If you ask, "What does this person need from me right now?" you become more thoughtful. The quality of your questions often determines the quality of your conversations. Imagine walking into an important meeting with the goal of speaking as little as possible while learning as much as possible. You might ask what the real problem is, what has already been tried, what people are worried about, what success would look like, and what information is still missing. By the end, you may understand the situation far better than you would have after giving a 10-minute speech. This is why questions can create influence without pressure. People are naturally more engaged when they participate in reaching an idea rather than simply receiving it from you. So, before your next conversation, resist the urge to prepare the perfect statement. Prepare a better question instead. Ask to understand, ask to clarify, ask to uncover, ask to challenge gently, ask to help someone think. And once you ask, do something equally important: listen to the answer. Because the intelligent communicator is not simply the person with the best things to say. It is the person who knows which question can make the conversation better. Chapter 6. Make complex ideas simple. Intelligence becomes truly useful when you can take something complicated and make it understandable. You may know a great deal about a subject, but if the person listening to you cannot follow your explanation, your knowledge remains trapped inside your head. Intelligent communication is not about making simple ideas sound complicated. It is about making complicated ideas feel simple enough for another person to grasp. Think about the difference between knowing something and explaining it. You might understand how a business works, how a technical system operates, or why a particular decision makes sense. But when someone asks you to explain it, you suddenly discover that knowing and communicating are two different skills. You can have excellent knowledge and still be a poor communicator. The first step toward clarity is understanding your own idea before you try to explain it. If your thoughts are scattered, your explanation will probably be scattered too. Before speaking, identify the central point. Ask yourself, What does this person actually need to understand? Not everything you know belongs in the explanation. Imagine Elliot Ramirez, a 29-year-old software consultant in Seattle. Elliot was highly capable and had earned a reputation for solving difficult technical problems. But during client meetings, he often used technical terms without realizing that the people across the table did not understand them. He believed that detailed explanations demonstrated expertise. Instead, his clients sometimes left meetings more confused than when they arrived. One afternoon, a client stopped him and said, "I understand that this is important, but I don't understand what you're asking us to do." That sentence changed Elliot's approach. At the next meeting, he explained the same technical issue using a simple comparison. He described the system as a series of connected doors, explaining which door was creating the delay and what needed to change. The room understood the problem almost immediately. Elliot had not become more knowledgeable overnight. He had simply learned to translate his knowledge. That is an important distinction. Intelligent communicators become translators. They take ideas from the language of their own expertise and convert them into language the listener can use. You can do this by choosing familiar words whenever possible. Instead of reaching for impressive vocabulary, reach for understandable vocabulary. If a simpler word communicates the idea accurately, use it. You are not lowering the quality of your thinking. You are increasing the number of people who can understand it. You should also use examples when an idea is difficult to visualize. A good example gives the listener something concrete to hold on to. If you are explaining a financial concept, connect it to an everyday decision. If you are explaining a leadership principle, describe how it might appear in a workplace. If you are explaining a personal habit, connect it to a familiar routine. Abstract ideas become easier when they have somewhere to land. Another powerful habit is to explain ideas in layers. Start with the simplest version, give the main point first, then add detail only when it is useful. If someone wants to understand the technical side, go deeper. If they only need the basic concept, don't force them through unnecessary information. This approach also helps you recognize whether the listener is following you. Pay attention to their questions and reactions. If they look confused, do not simply repeat the same explanation louder or with more words. Change the explanation. Sometimes the problem is not the listener. It is the way the idea was presented. You should also resist the temptation to correct every small misunderstanding immediately. Focus first on the central idea. Communication is not a test where you receive points for including every possible detail. The goal is shared understanding. And remember that simplicity requires discipline. It is often easier to speak for 20 minutes than to explain something clearly in 3 minutes. A long explanation gives you room to wander. A short explanation forces you to decide what matters. That is why clear communication often begins with clear thinking. When you understand your message deeply, you can remove what is unnecessary. You can predict where someone might become confused. You can choose a useful example. You can explain the same idea from another angle if needed. The next time someone asks you to explain something, do not ask yourself, "How can I show them how much I know?" Ask, "How can I help them understand?" That question changes your entire approach. Your goal is not to sound sophisticated. Your goal is to make understanding effortless. The strongest communicator in the room may not be the person who knows the most complicated words. It may be the person who can take the most complicated idea and make everyone else say, "Now I understand." Chapter 7. Control your reaction before it controls you. A conversation can change in a single second. One sentence touches a nerve, your body tightens, your thoughts accelerate, and suddenly you are no longer choosing your words, you are reacting. The other person may have said something careless, unfair, or deliberately provocative, but the moment you surrender control of your response, they have gained control of the conversation. Intelligent communication does not require you to become emotionless. It requires you to become emotionally responsible. Anger, embarrassment, frustration, disappointment, and fear are natural human responses. The problem begins when you allow those feelings to make decisions for you. When emotion takes the steering wheel, even a reasonable person can say something unreasonable. A sentence spoken in anger may take 5 seconds to deliver and 5 months to repair. So the first skill is learning to recognize yourself before you react. Notice what happens in your body. Perhaps your voice becomes louder, your breathing becomes faster, your shoulders tighten. You feel the urge to interrupt. You start constructing a defense before the other person has finished speaking. These signals are valuable. They are early warnings telling you that your emotional system has become activated. When you notice them, slow down. You do not have to answer immediately. You can take a breath. You can drink some water. You can lower your voice. You can say, "I want to respond to that carefully." A simple sentence like this creates distance between emotion and action. That distance is where self-control becomes possible. Think about a difficult conversation at work. Someone criticizes a decision you made. Your first thought may be, "They have no idea what they're talking about." Your second thought may be, "I need to prove them wrong." If you follow those thoughts immediately, the conversation becomes a battle. But what if you ask yourself a different question? What part of what they said is actually useful? That question does not mean accepting the criticism. It means separating the useful information from the emotional reaction. Perhaps their delivery was poor, but there is still something you can learn. Perhaps they are completely wrong, but responding calmly will make your position stronger. This distinction is essential. You can reject someone's behavior without surrendering your behavior to them. You will encounter people who speak harshly. You will encounter people who misunderstand you. You will encounter people who project their frustration onto you. You cannot prevent every unpleasant interaction, but you can decide whether their emotional state becomes yours. Imagine someone raises their voice at you. You raise yours in return. They become louder. You become louder. Soon the volume has replaced the substance of the conversation. Now imagine you lower your voice instead. You say, "I want to solve this, but we need to speak calmly." You have not surrendered. You have changed the direction of the interaction. Calmness can be powerful because it removes fuel from unnecessary conflict. This is especially important when communicating through text. Written words remove facial expressions, tone, and body language, which means a frustrated message can easily sound harsher than intended. When you are angry, the temptation to type everything you are feeling can be overwhelming. But you do not have to send every thought you have. Write the message if you need to, then wait, read it later. Ask yourself, if I received this message, would I feel invited to solve the problem or pushed into defending myself? That question can save you from many unnecessary conflicts. Emotional control also means knowing when not to continue. Some conversations become unproductive because both people are too emotionally charged to think clearly. In such moments, walking away temporarily is not avoidance. It can be wisdom. You might say, "I don't think we're going to solve this while we're both frustrated. Let's continue when we can talk properly." The goal is not to escape difficult conversations. The goal is to have them when your judgment is available. And be careful with the desire to have the final word. Sometimes the urge to say one more sentence is actually the ego asking for victory. You may already have made your point, but you continue because you want the other person to admit that you are right. Let that go. You do not need every disagreement to end with the other person surrendering. Sometimes the strongest communication is knowing when the conversation has reached its useful end. You cannot control what people say. You cannot control their mood, their assumptions, or their behavior. But you can control what you contribute to the moment. That is your responsibility. So the next time someone pushes your emotional buttons, do not immediately pull the trigger. Pause, breathe, listen, choose. Your emotions can inform you, but they should not command you, because when you control your reaction, you protect something far more valuable than winning an argument. You protect your judgment, your relationships, your reputation, and your peace. Chapter 8. Disagree without losing respect. Disagreement is unavoidable. At work, at home, in friendships, in business, and in ordinary conversations, you will meet people who see things differently from you. The goal of intelligent communication is not to eliminate disagreement. It is to learn how to disagree without turning a difference of opinion into a battle of personalities. When someone challenges your view, your first instinct may be to defend it. You may begin collecting evidence in your head, searching for flaws in their argument, or preparing the sentence that will prove you are right. But the moment you make the conversation about defeating the other person, understanding disappears. You can disagree with an idea without disrespecting the person who holds it. That distinction sounds simple, but it requires practice. Instead of saying, "That's a ridiculous idea," you might say, "I see the situation differently." Instead of saying, "You don't understand," you could say, "I think we're looking at this from different angles." The disagreement remains, but the unnecessary attack disappears. Your words create the environment in which the other person will respond. If you make them feel attacked, they will naturally protect themselves. If you make them feel respected, they are more likely to consider what you are saying. This is why intelligent disagreement begins with understanding. Before challenging someone's conclusion, make sure you understand how they arrived at it. Ask, "What led you to that conclusion?" or "Which part of the situation concerns you most?" You may discover that you were disagreeing with an assumption the other person never actually made. Sometimes the problem is not the disagreement. It is the speed at which we disagree. You hear one sentence and immediately decide that the person is wrong. But conversations are rarely that simple. Give the other person enough space to complete their thought. Listen for the reasoning behind their position, then respond to the strongest version of what they said, not the easiest version to attack. There is strength in saying, "I understand why you see it that way." That sentence does not mean you have changed your mind. It means you have demonstrated that you are capable of understanding a perspective without feeling threatened by it. This is especially important when the disagreement happens in public. Correcting someone in front of others can easily become a contest of pride. Even if your information is accurate, humiliating someone rarely creates lasting influence. If the correction is important, consider the setting. A private conversation may accomplish far more than a public victory. You should also learn to distinguish between important disagreements and unnecessary ones. Not every difference deserves a debate. Sometimes the subject has no meaningful consequence. Sometimes the other person simply wants to express an opinion. Sometimes continuing the argument will cost more time and energy than the issue is worth. Ask yourself, does this need to be resolved? That question can save you from countless pointless arguments. There are also moments when you should stand your ground. Respect does not mean becoming passive. If a decision matters, if a boundary is being crossed, or if something important is factually wrong, you can speak firmly. But firmness does not require hostility. You can say, "I respect your position, but I don't agree with it." You can say, "I'm open to discussing this, but I'm not comfortable with the way we're speaking to each other." You can say, "I understand your concern, my decision remains the same." These statements communicate strength without aggression. Remember that your goal in a disagreement should not always be to change the other person's mind. Sometimes the goal is simply to understand each other more clearly. Sometimes it is to find a workable solution. Sometimes it is to establish a boundary. And sometimes the healthiest outcome is agreeing that you see the issue differently. You do not need intellectual victory in every conversation. In fact, one of the clearest signs of confidence is the ability to say, "I might be wrong." Those words do not diminish you. They demonstrate that your identity is not attached to being correct about everything. When you can reconsider your position without feeling humiliated, you become harder to manipulate and easier to respect. The next time someone disagrees with you, resist the urge to prepare your counterattack while they are still speaking. Listen completely, ask questions, identify the real point of disagreement, then express your position calmly and clearly. And if the conversation becomes disrespectful, Do not become disrespectful simply because the other person has. You can leave the argument without losing your dignity. You can hold your position without attacking theirs. And you can walk away knowing that intelligent communication is not about making everyone agree with you. It is about becoming someone who can remain thoughtful, composed, and respectful even when agreement is impossible. Chapter 9. Turn attention into connection. Attention is one of the rarest forms of respect you can give another person. When you genuinely give someone your attention, you are quietly communicating, "You matter enough for me to be here." No impressive speech can replace that message. No clever phrase can compensate for someone feeling ignored while you are supposedly listening. Connection begins with presence. You can be physically beside someone and mentally somewhere else. Your eyes may be on them while your mind is checking your phone, planning your next task, rehearsing your response, or wondering how much longer the conversation will last. People notice this more than you think. They may not always say anything, but they can feel when your attention is divided. Intelligent communication therefore requires you to become fully present. When someone is speaking to you, give them a few moments without reaching for your phone. Look at them naturally. Listen without constantly preparing your answer. If the conversation matters, let the rest of the world wait for a moment. This sounds simple because it is simple, but simple does not mean easy. Your attention is constantly being pulled in different directions. Messages arrive, notifications appear, work demands your focus. Your mind jumps between responsibilities. If you allow every interruption to control you, meaningful conversations become increasingly difficult. So practice protecting your attention. When someone tells you something important, don't immediately redirect the conversation toward yourself. If a friend says they are struggling with something, you don't have to respond with your own similar experience. If a colleague shares a concern, you don't have to immediately explain what you would do. Stay with their experience for a moment. Ask, "How did that affect you?" Or, "What happened after that?" Or simply, "What do you think you're going to do?" These questions communicate something powerful. You are interested in the person, not merely waiting for your turn to speak. There is another simple habit that creates connection. Remember details. If someone mentioned an important presentation last week, ask how it went. If a colleague told you their parent was visiting, ask how the visit went. If someone shared a goal with you, remember it the next time you see them. You don't need an extraordinary memory to do this. You need attention. People feel valued when they realize that you actually heard them. Imagine someone telling you about a problem on Monday and then having you ask about it on Friday. The question may take only 10 seconds, but it tells them that their words did not disappear the moment the conversation ended. This is one of the simplest ways to build trust. You should also learn to notice the difference between hearing information and hearing emotion. Someone might say, "I have too much work this week." The literal message is about workload, but the emotional message might be, "I'm overwhelmed." If you respond only to the surface, you might offer a solution. If you recognize the emotion, you might first say, "Sounds like you're carrying a lot right now." That small acknowledgement can change the entire conversation. You don't always have to fix what people feel. Sometimes they simply want to know that someone understands. Connection also requires patience. People do not always communicate perfectly. They may struggle to find the right words. They may tell a story in a complicated way. They may repeat themselves because the subject matters deeply to them. If you constantly rush them toward the conclusion, you may miss what they were trying to express. Let people take their time when the relationship matters, and when you need to disagree, correct, or give feedback, begin from a place of attention rather than judgment. Make sure you understand what the person is actually saying before deciding what they deserve to hear from you. There is a quiet power in making someone feel seen. You don't need to flatter them. You don't need to agree with everything they say. You don't need to become endlessly available. Genuine connection is not about pleasing people. It is about being present enough to understand them and respectful enough to treat their words as meaningful. At the same time, remember that attention is something you should give yourself as well. If you are constantly distracted, exhausted, and mentally scattered, your ability to connect with others will suffer. A clear mind listens better, so begin treating attention as a form of communication. When someone speaks, be there. When they finish, remember what mattered. When they return to the subject, show that you remember. When they share something difficult, resist the urge to immediately solve it. And when you are with someone who matters to you, give them something increasingly rare in modern life, your undivided presence. People may forget the exact words you used, but they will remember how it felt to have your full attention. And that feeling is where genuine connection begins. Chapter 10. Set boundaries without creating conflict. A boundary is not a wall you build against people. It is a clear line that tells others how you are willing to communicate, what you can accept, and where you need to protect your time, energy, or dignity. When you communicate boundaries well, you do not become cold or difficult, you become clear. Many people avoid boundaries because they fear disappointing others. They say yes when they mean no, agree when they disagree, answer every request immediately, and tolerate behavior that quietly builds resentment. Then, after holding everything inside for too long, they finally explode. The problem is not that they cared too much. The problem is that they waited too long to communicate clearly. Intelligent communication allows you to address small problems before they become large ones. If someone repeatedly interrupts you, you do not need to remain silent until you become furious. You can calmly say, "Let me finish this thought, and then I want to hear your view." That sentence is firm without being hostile. If someone regularly contacts you outside working hours, you can say, "I usually respond to work messages during the day. I'll get back to you tomorrow." You are not attacking them, you are simply explaining how you operate. Clear boundaries reduce confusion because people no longer have to guess what you will accept. One reason boundaries create conflict is that people sometimes communicate them with accumulated anger. After months of frustration, they finally release everything at once. Their words contain not only the current problem, but every previous problem they never addressed. That makes a reasonable boundary sound like a personal attack. Instead, practice addressing issues while they are still manageable. You do not need a dramatic speech. Often, one calm sentence is enough. "I can't take that on this week. I'd rather discuss this privately. I understand your request, but I won't be able to do that. I'm happy to discuss the issue, but not if we're insulting each other." These statements are powerful because they do not require a long defense. You also need to become comfortable with the word no. Saying no does not automatically make you selfish. Your time is limited, your attention is limited, your energy is limited. If you say yes to everything, you eventually have less of yourself available for the commitments that genuinely matter. The intelligent communicator understands that every yes has a cost, but there is an art to saying no without unnecessary friction. You do not have to give 10 reasons. Excessive explanations can make your decision sound negotiable when it is not. Instead of saying, "I'm really sorry and I wish I could help, but I've been extremely busy lately and I have several things going on, so maybe if things were different," you can simply say, "I appreciate you asking, but I can't take this on right now." Clear, respectful, complete. Of course, some people will push back. They may ask again, question your reason, or try to make you feel guilty. This is where consistency becomes important. You do not need a new explanation every time someone challenges your boundary. You can calmly repeat yourself, "I understand, but my answer is still no." That sentence may feel uncomfortable at first, but discomfort does not mean you are doing something wrong. Sometimes it simply means you are practicing a skill you have neglected. Boundaries also apply to conversations. If someone repeatedly turns every discussion into an argument, you can choose not to participate. If someone insults you, you can end the conversation. If someone demands an immediate answer to an important decision, you can ask for time to consider it. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to change the subject. You are allowed to say, "I'm not discussing this right now." The key is to communicate these choices calmly rather than using them as weapons. A boundary becomes stronger when you do not need anger to enforce it. And remember, boundaries are not only about other people, you also need boundaries with yourself. Perhaps you answer messages the moment they arrive. Perhaps you allow interruptions to destroy your concentration. Perhaps you continue arguments long after they have stopped being productive. Your own habits can consume your attention just as easily as another person's demands. Decide what deserves access to you. Then communicate those decisions through consistent behavior. Some people may dislike your boundaries. That is possible, but your responsibility is not to make everyone comfortable with every decision you make. Your responsibility is to communicate honestly and treat people respectfully. You can be kind without being endlessly available. You can be generous without saying yes to everything. You can be respectful without tolerating disrespect. And you can protect your peace without creating unnecessary enemies. When your boundaries become clear, resentment has less room to grow. People know where you stand, and you no longer have to rely on emotional explosions to be heard. That is intelligent communication at its best. Not louder, not harsher, simply clearer. Chapter 11. Persuade without pushing. Influence becomes strongest when people do not feel forced to give it to you. You can pressure someone into saying yes, but pressure rarely creates lasting trust. Intelligent persuasion works differently. It begins with understanding what matters to another person, and then communicating your idea in a way that connects with those priorities. Think about the difference between being pushed and being persuaded. When someone tells you, "You need to do this because I'm telling you it's the right thing," your natural reaction may be resistance. But when someone takes the time to understand your concerns, explains the benefits clearly, answers your questions, and gives you room to decide, you are much more likely to consider the idea. The first principle of persuasion is simple: understand before you influence. Before trying to convince someone, learn what they care about. What problem are they trying to solve? What are they worried about? What outcome do they want? What would make them hesitate? If you ignore these questions, you may spend 10 minutes explaining something that solves a problem the other person does not actually have. Imagine you are presenting a new process to a team at work. You might focus entirely on how much money the process could save. But if the team is already overwhelmed, their biggest concern may not be money. They may care more about whether the new process will make their daily workload easier. The same proposal can sound completely different depending on what you emphasize. Persuasion becomes easier when you connect your message to something meaningful to the listener. This does not mean manipulating people. It means communicating relevance. If you are trying to convince a colleague to adopt a new system, explain how it can reduce repetitive work. If you are leading a team toward a difficult goal, explain why the goal matters and what it will make possible. If you are negotiating, understand what the other side values instead of assuming that your priorities are theirs. People pay attention when they can see themselves inside the solution. Another important principle is evidence. Confidence can make an idea sound attractive, but evidence makes it credible. When the decision matters, support your claims. Use examples, numbers, demonstrations, or clear reasoning when appropriate. But be careful not to overwhelm people with information. 10 weak arguments do not necessarily become stronger than one compelling argument. Choose the evidence that actually supports the decision. Stories can also help people understand an idea. A good story gives information a human shape. Instead of saying that a new approach will improve customer satisfaction, you might describe what happens when a frustrated customer finally receives a simple, thoughtful response. The listener can picture the outcome, but persuasion should never depend on exaggeration. Do not promise what you cannot deliver. Do not hide important disadvantages. Do not create artificial urgency simply to force a decision. Short-term pressure may produce a result, but honesty creates something more valuable: credibility. And credibility compounds. When people learn that your words consistently match reality, they become more willing to listen the next time you speak. You should also learn to stop persuading when persuasion has reached its limit. Some people need time, some need more information, some simply disagree. You do not have to chase every person until they surrender. Give people room to think. This is one of the most overlooked parts of influence. If you speak continuously after presenting your idea, you can accidentally turn persuasion into pressure. You may answer questions nobody asked, defend objections that have not been raised, and create resistance where none existed. Make your case, then allow silence. Let the other person process. There is also a difference between persuasion and winning. Winning means getting the outcome you want. Persuasion means helping someone see enough value and clarity to make a decision willingly. The second approach creates stronger relationships because the person does not feel defeated. This matters especially in leadership. A leader who constantly forces compliance may get short-term obedience, but a leader who teaches people to understand the purpose behind decisions creates stronger commitment. So when you want to influence someone, begin by becoming genuinely interested in their perspective. Ask questions, listen, identify what matters, connect your idea to that concern, explain it clearly, support it honestly, then give the person room to decide. You do not need to push harder when your message is relevant, credible, and respectfully delivered. The strongest influence is not the pressure that makes someone say yes, it is the trust that makes them willing to listen. Chapter 12. Speak with confidence, not ego. Confidence can be heard before a person finishes a sentence. It is not necessarily loud, dramatic, or commanding. Often, genuine confidence sounds surprisingly calm. It does not rush to prove itself, compete for attention, or turn every conversation into a demonstration of intelligence. It simply communicates with clarity and accepts that it does not need to impress everyone. Ego works differently. Ego wants recognition. It wants to be right, admired, noticed, and respected immediately. It can make you interrupt because you believe your thought is more important. It can make you over-explain because you want everyone to know how much you understand. It can make you correct small mistakes that do not matter simply because you want to demonstrate that you noticed them. The difference is subtle, but people feel it. Imagine someone enters a meeting and constantly uses complicated language, mentions impressive connections, corrects everyone, and makes sure their achievements appear in every conversation. They may appear confident for a few minutes, but eventually people begin to recognize the effort behind the performance. Now imagine someone equally knowledgeable who speaks simply, listens carefully, admits when they don't know something, and contributes only when they have something useful to add. That person may say less, but their words often carry more weight. That is confidence without ego. You do not need to announce your value when your behavior demonstrates it. One of the clearest signs of confidence is the ability to say, "I don't know." Those three words can feel difficult because many people believe uncertainty makes them look weak. In reality, pretending to know everything is far more damaging. When you admit what you don't know, you create room to learn. You also make the things you do know more credible. If you say, "I'm not certain, but I'll find out," people know they can trust your answer. You should also stop treating every conversation as an opportunity to prove yourself. Someone tells you about an accomplishment and you immediately mention yours. Someone shares an experience and you explain how you experienced something even more impressive. Someone makes a mistake and you rush to show that you knew better. This creates competition where connection could have existed. You do not have to win every comparison. Let other people have their moment. You can listen to someone's success without turning it into your own story. You can admire someone's knowledge without feeling diminished by it. You can allow another person to receive attention without believing that their attention takes something away from you. That is emotional confidence. Your tone matters too. Confidence does not require speaking loudly. In fact, lowering your pace can make your communication more deliberate. When you rush, your words can sound uncertain, even when your idea is strong. Take your time, finish your sentences. Avoid constantly changing your position simply because someone disagrees. At the same time, don't confuse confidence with stubbornness. A confident person can change their mind. If someone presents better information, you should be able to say, "You're right, I hadn't considered that." That sentence does not weaken your authority. It strengthens it because it shows that your commitment is to truth rather than pride. Another important habit is to stop over-explaining yourself. If you have made a reasonable decision, you do not need to create a 20-minute defense every time someone questions it. State your reasoning clearly, answer legitimate questions, then let the decision stand. People often over-explain because they are afraid of being misunderstood. But excessive explanation can make you sound as though you are seeking permission for your own position. Say what you mean, support it when necessary, then stop. Confidence also means becoming comfortable with silence. After you make a statement, you don't have to immediately add another sentence. After someone asks you a difficult question, you don't need to answer at lightning speed. Let your thoughts settle. A calm pause can communicate more confidence than a nervous stream of words. And remember that confidence is not something you perform for other people. It is something you build through keeping promises to yourself, developing competence, accepting mistakes, and becoming comfortable with who you are. When you know you are growing, you have less need to convince everyone that you have already arrived. So speak clearly, listen generously. Admit what you don't know. Allow others to shine. Change your mind when the evidence deserves it, and stop trying to turn every conversation into proof of your importance. The person with genuine confidence does not enter a room asking, "How can I make everyone respect me?" They enter asking, "What can I contribute?" That small shift moves communication away from ego and toward value. And when your focus becomes value, your words naturally become more powerful. Chapter 13. Handle high-stakes conversations with precision. Some conversations matter more than others. A casual disagreement can disappear by the end of the day, but a conversation about trust, money, performance, responsibility, relationships, or the future can change everything. When the stakes are high, your words need more than confidence, they need precision. In difficult moments, people often make one of two mistakes. They either say too much because they are nervous, or they say too little because they are afraid of what might happen. Intelligent communication requires something different. You need to understand what matters, choose your words carefully, and remain steady enough to communicate what needs to be communicated. Before an important conversation, know your purpose. Ask yourself, what needs to be different when this conversation is over? Maybe you need to resolve a misunderstanding. Maybe you need to give difficult feedback. Maybe you need to ask for a change. Maybe you need to admit that you made a mistake. When you know the purpose, you are less likely to wander into unrelated complaints or emotional accusations. This preparation can change everything. Imagine you need to tell a colleague that their repeated missed deadlines are affecting the entire team. You could enter the conversation carrying weeks of frustration and say, "You never take deadlines seriously, and everyone is tired of dealing with this." That may express your anger, but it does little to solve the problem. A more precise approach would be, "The last 3 projects were delivered after the agreed deadlines, and it has affected the team's ability to complete the next stage. I want to understand what's causing the delays and agree on a better process." The second statement is firm, but it leaves room for a solution. Notice the difference between describing behavior and attacking character. "You missed 3 deadlines" is about something observable. "You're irresponsible" is a judgment about someone's identity. The first can be discussed. The second usually creates defensiveness. When the stakes are high, stay close to facts. This does not mean becoming cold. Emotion can belong in an important conversation. If someone has disappointed you, it is reasonable to say so. If trust has been damaged, you can explain how it affected you. But communicate the experience without turning it into an attack. Instead of saying, "You don't care about me," you might say, "When you cancelled at the last minute without telling me why, I felt that my time wasn't being respected." That gives the other person something they can actually respond to. Timing matters too. A good message delivered at the wrong moment can fail. If someone is exhausted, angry, distracted, or surrounded by other people, even a reasonable conversation may become unnecessarily difficult. Whenever possible, choose a setting that gives both people enough privacy and mental space to communicate properly. And do not mistake urgency for importance. Something can be important without requiring an immediate conversation. If you are angry, wait until you can speak without turning anger into ammunition. If you have just received upsetting information, make sure you understand it before confronting someone. If you are uncertain about what happened, gather the facts first. A few hours of patience can prevent months of repair. Difficult conversations also require courage. You cannot always communicate perfectly, and you cannot guarantee that the other person will respond well. Your responsibility is to speak honestly and respectfully anyway. If you need to say no clearly. If you made a mistake, admit it without hiding behind excuses. If someone crossed a boundary, address it. If you need an apology, ask for one. If a relationship is no longer healthy, be honest about what needs to change. Precision does not mean avoiding uncomfortable truths. It means delivering them without unnecessary damage. There is also power in knowing when to stop talking. After you have communicated the important point, give the other person room to respond. Do not immediately fill every silence because you are nervous about their reaction. They may need time to process what you said. Listen to their response, even when you dislike it. Sometimes a high-stakes conversation reveals information you did not expect. Perhaps you misunderstood something. Perhaps the other person has a legitimate concern. Perhaps the problem is larger than you realized. Staying open does not weaken your position. It allows you to respond to reality rather than the story you created in your head. And if the conversation becomes disrespectful, remember what you learned earlier in this audiobook. You can pause, you can set a boundary, you can continue later. You do not have to sacrifice your composure simply because the subject is important. The higher the stakes, the more valuable your self-control becomes. Speak clearly, use facts, name the real issue, say what you need, listen carefully, give the other person space, and resist the temptation to use 10 words when 5 will do. Your most important conversations deserve your best communication, not your fastest reaction. When the moment matters, don't simply speak from what you feel, speak from what you want to create. Chapter 14. Become someone worth listening to. Intelligent communication is not a collection of tricks you perform when you want to impress someone. It is a way of carrying yourself through the world. After you learn to speak with intention, listen deeply, pause before reacting, simplify your ideas, ask better questions, manage disagreement, set boundaries, persuade without pressure, and communicate with confidence, something deeper begins to change. Communication stops being something you do and becomes part of who you are. The goal was never to become the person who talks the most. It was never to have the cleverest response in the room or win every argument. The deeper goal is to become someone whose words have earned attention. That kind of influence cannot be manufactured overnight. It is built through consistency. When you regularly listen instead of interrupting, people notice. When you remain calm while others become emotional, people notice. When you admit that you are wrong, people notice. When you say what you mean without unnecessary explanation, people notice. When your private behavior matches your public words, people notice. Over time, these small choices create a reputation. People begin to know what to expect from you. They know that when you speak, you have probably thought about what you are saying. They know that you will not turn every disagreement into a personal battle. They know that you can hear uncomfortable information without immediately becoming defensive. They know that your confidence does not depend on making someone else feel small. That is what makes a communicator worth listening to. You have also learned that speaking less is not the same as becoming silent. Silence has value when it creates space for thought. But when something important needs to be said, Intelligent communication requires courage. You cannot hide behind silence simply because speaking honestly feels uncomfortable. Sometimes you need to say, "I disagree." Sometimes you need to say, "I made a mistake." Sometimes you need to say, "That is not acceptable." Sometimes you need to say, "I don't know." And sometimes you need to say, "I'm sorry." The intelligent communicator knows that the power of words comes from using them deliberately. You should also remember that communication begins with how you think. If your mind is constantly filled with assumptions, insecurity, anger, and the need to prove yourself, those things eventually find their way into your speech. Better communication, therefore, requires better self-awareness. Before correcting someone, ask whether correction is necessary. Before responding to criticism, ask whether there is something useful inside it. Before giving advice, ask whether the person actually wants it. Before disagreeing, make sure you understand the position you're challenging. Before speaking, ask what result you want your words to create. These small questions can transform ordinary conversations. You will still make mistakes. You will still lose your patience occasionally. You will sometimes speak too quickly, explain too much, misunderstand someone, or wish you had chosen different words. That is part of being human. Do not expect perfection. Instead, become better at noticing. When you communicate poorly, reflect on it. What triggered you? Where did the conversation change? What could you have said differently? Then carry that lesson into the next conversation. This is how communication becomes a lifelong discipline. You should also remember that respect is not created by demanding attention. You cannot force people to value your words. You earn that value through the way you consistently treat people. Listen when others speak. Give credit when someone deserves it. Keep your promises. Do not gossip simply because gossip creates attention. Do not use someone's vulnerability against them. Do not say something cruel merely because you know it will hurt. And never confuse having the ability to say something with having the wisdom to say it. Your communication reveals your character. Every conversation gives you another opportunity to demonstrate patience, clarity, courage, humility, and respect. Over time, those qualities become recognizable. People begin to trust not only what you say, but the person behind the words. That is the real destination. You do not need to become louder. You do not need to dominate conversations. You do not need to have an answer for everything. You need... Conclusion. The way you communicate quietly shapes the life you experience. Your relationships, your reputation, your opportunities, your leadership, and even your peace of mind are influenced by the words you choose and the words you choose not to say. You began this audiobook with a simple idea. You do not need to speak more to become more influential. You need to communicate with greater intention. That means pausing before you respond, listening beyond the surface of someone's words, asking questions instead of rushing to conclusions, cutting away unnecessary explanations, making complicated ideas simple, controlling your reactions when emotions rise, disagreeing without turning another person into an enemy, setting boundaries without hostility, persuading without pressure, and speaking with confidence without allowing your ego to take control. None of these skills require you to become someone you are not. They require you to become more deliberate about the person you already are. The next time someone challenges you, remember the pause. The next time someone speaks, remember to listen for what they mean, not only what they say. The next time you feel the need to explain yourself for the 5th time, remember that clarity does not require repetition. The next time you disagree, remember that you can defend an idea without attacking a person. And when you feel the temptation to prove how intelligent, successful, or knowledgeable you are, remember that genuine confidence rarely needs an announcement. Let your behavior speak first. Let your consistency strengthen your words. Let your ability to listen become part of your influence, and become comfortable with silence. Silence is not emptiness. Sometimes it is thought, sometimes it is restraint, sometimes it is respect. Sometimes it is the space another person needs to finally say what they were afraid to say. You will not communicate perfectly every day. You will lose your patience sometimes. You will interrupt. You will say too much. You will misunderstand someone. You will occasionally wish you had chosen different words. That is not failure. The important thing is to notice, learn, and improve. Communication is a lifelong discipline because people are constantly changing, circumstances are constantly changing, and every conversation presents a new challenge. So don't leave this audiobook with the goal of becoming a perfect communicator. Leave with the goal of becoming a more intentional one. Before you speak, think. Before you judge, understand. Before you react, pause. Before you persuade, listen. Before you disagree, respect. Before you explain, simplify. And before you say something simply because you can, ask whether it truly needs to be said. Your words are small, but their consequences can be enormous. Use them to clarify rather than confuse, to strengthen rather than weaken, to connect rather than divide, to influence without controlling, to lead without dominating. Speak less when less is enough. Speak boldly when something important needs to be said. And when you do speak, make your words carry the weight of thought, character, and purpose. Because the intelligent communicator is not the person everyone notices first. It is the person people remember, the person they trust, the person they listen to, and ultimately the person whose words matter because they have learnt that every word does not need to be spoken, but the right words should never be wasted.